This is not a line item expense. This is a strategy. AI is a strategy. And what do you need to do to bring your people along, at least for now, on that train?
Welcome to ThoughtSparks. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Rita McGrath here. Welcome to an edition of the ThoughtSparks podcast, where I invite people who are authors and entrepreneurs and business leaders and other notable people who have great ideas that are able to spark your thinking. And today, my guest is Deborah Perry Piscione, who I've just learned to pronounce her name.
Great job.
who is a former anchor at CNN. She's done a whole bunch of different things in her life. But most recently, she's running an organization, as I understand it, called the Work3 Institute, and is the co-author of this very provocative book called Employment is Dead. And so what we're going to do for the next hour or so is chat about the book, find out what she's seeing out there in the world that would allow such a provocative statement to be made. So Deborah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rita. It's lovely to see you again. I just want to make one correction. I was not an anchor at CNN, but I was a commentator for many years.
You were a commentator. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. You know, to an outside person, is that a different thing? I guess it is.
Yeah. One's an internal person and then one's an external expert. Yes.
Fun. That's really cool. All right, so let's start off with the big question, which is your argument in the book is that employment is basically a thing of the past, or will soon be a thing of the past. What prompted you to come up with that thesis?
So at least employment as we know it, right, is going to go away. And I think it was very proven to us all that we could work under very different circumstances during COVID. But now the stars are aligning. The technology is here with AI, and humanoids is going to be right behind it. So we're moving into physical AI, and I have yet to be proven. There'll be some jobs here and there that will last, but at least the work vessel that we know, the 9 to 5, is going to be that relic of the past. And we have many different ways of working and generating revenue. But as AI adoption continues throughout corporate structures around the world, there is going to be this ability to eliminate jobs. And truly, while I respect some of the surveys and the research that has been put out there, nobody really knows the jobs that are going to transpire in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, in another conversation, I was talking to a gentleman who wrote a great book called Reshuffle. And his argument is that, you're with AI and some of these other things, what you're basically seeing is change at the systems level, not at the kind of product level. And I think that really changes everything. I mean, if you think about, there used to be jobs for people called typists. There used to be jobs for people called telegraph operators. There used to be jobs for loggers that were artisanal jobs. They weren't like guys out there with chainsaws cutting down trees. And so when you have a systems level change, the nature of the employment definitely has to shift. So you talk about 4 kind of underlying forces of change that are going to make it much easier for people to create value on their own, and maybe expand on that a little bit. What's decoupling the nature of what has kept jobs in place for 100 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think the disruption really started to happen right during COVID, and we were all forced to work at home. And then all of a sudden, technologies like Zoom bubbled up, and we realized, well, not only can we get our work done, but in many respects, we can be even more productive. Simultaneously, you had factors of what was considered decentralized work, whether you consider it driving for Uber or being a DoorDash delivery person. So all of this has been evolving, right, over time. But, as I shared, really, we know that AI has been discussed, at least since the 1950s. But the technology and the ability, the GPU power, compute power behind it wasn't quite ready for prime time. Now it just gets better every day. And so, you're looking at things like Nano Banana that can now replace creativity. that can do that visualization. I've certainly talked to very traditional cognitive workers, but also people like musicians that are very frustrated over the fact that AI can now take their jobs over by creating and making music as well. So, what was in the book then has really just expedited very quickly on these factors that are really going to be very apparent to chief revenue officers and CFOs that, AI generally runs about 10 cents an hour right now compared to your average cognitive worker, which is about $50 an hour if you account for health insurance and retirement and things like that. I mean, it really, Rita, it just comes down to economics in the future. We are moving very, very rapidly towards that company of one, and those few companies, a dozen companies that are going to dominate the landscape in the future, because you're just not going to be able to compete with them economically, the money, the power, the resources that they have. And then there'll be those startups that will kind of lay above and beyond those dozen companies that will eventually get acquired and absorbed into the dozen, a powerful dozen.
So clearly there's a thread in the book about, there are an awful lot of jobs that are going away. And I'm thinking of, Hollywood, right? And we've had our Tilly Norwood moment where we've got our actual first AI actress who's being represented by an agent who's now available to produce movies, at a fraction of the cost of what conventional movie production requires, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's that destruction part. But I think your book is sort of optimistic that even in the midst of the sort of implosion of traditional employment and traditional jobs, that there will be opportunities for humans. And I think this is where your Work3 Institute work comes out, to create their own jobs, to create their own way of making a living in the world. So talk a little bit about that.
So we were, even before AI became hot, there were other, technologies that the media covered very favorably, whether it was the metaverse or blockchain technology, which enabled people to be able to work on decentralized work, what we call decentralized work. Again, something like Uber, where you didn't have a boss, you could kind of work when you wanted to. Uber's become much more centralized as they've grown and grown and grown. But there are project-based jobs that you can tap into anywhere around the world where a person can pop into a big corporation or a startup when that role is needed and then pop out. It's not necessarily a continuation. I think what we're going to be looking at is even more massive destruction of kind of the employment landscape. By the time we get to 2030, that is when we anticipate that we're going to have widespread adoption. So then we've got to start thinking about entirely new revenue models, or what's government's role. I don't think we can call it unemployment or even move towards UBI. Then we're going to start looking at a meaning crisis and an identity crisis. And I think, we are of the world or the generation where, the job has been incredibly meaningful for us. But there was a time that cognitive work did not exist. We were builders, we were farmers, we did all sorts of roles. And I think we're very quickly are going to get to this adoption that we've never seen in a transformation before, that government is going to have to take a very significant role in figuring out, how people survive.
Yeah. So when you say UBI, just for those of you that may not be familiar with that, that's universal basic income.
Yes. Yep.
And there's a lot of debate about that. There was a recent story, I forget where I read it, where it was like three people walk into a bar, two billionaires and an economist. And one billionaire says socialism, the second billionaire says UBI, and the third one says, I told you so. And the Marx.
Yes. Yeah.
You go all the way back to Marxian economics. What he basically argued was that if you had so much productivity in the world of production and so little expense in the the creation of that production, that you would have nobody able to afford to buy the product of that production, and that capitalism would inevitably kind of start eating its own tail. I mean, that was, and so far that hasn't happened, but certainly there are elements of that run through your book, and that governments need to start paying attention to.
Yeah, I do think we're going to have this great displacement, right? And there's an entire realm of possibilities. I had a very interesting dinner conversation in Denmark this past summer, and I was sitting next to one of Denmark's most successful entrepreneurs. He now lives in Switzerland. He said, "What do you think is going to happen to humans?" And I said, "I think we're going to go full circle. We'll go back to being builders. We may grow our own food. We'll become better community members. We really don't need to commute beyond, a 5-mile radius." And he looked at me, very, very genius individual, and said, "I think humans are going to go extinct." I looked at him like he was crazy, and I was waiting for that moment of sarcasm. And he said, "Look, humans, they're only good for 2 things, for paying taxes and procreating. Otherwise, they screw up everything." So, you have people thinking very, very, I don't want to say dramatically, but there is a reason why we're thinking about colonizing Mars. Maybe we'll move to a new planet. It is a wealth of possibilities that we need to start exploring what humans are going to be doing in the future. And it really, Rita, it just comes, the technology is there, and it gets better every minute. And so it's just a matter of how fast the big corporates initially are going to make this adoption.
Now, this obviously is most germane for what you've called cognitive work. But what about the guys, in factories making vaccines or car seats or whatever? That there is, and there's also a huge issue around work, care work, right? So looking after people, nursing, teaching people, training people, there's a lot of stuff you can't just phone in. So is this a 2-part world now, where some people are still going to be in this almost hierarchical production system and other people are going to be off on Mars? I mean, what do you see happening there?
So earlier this year, I used to talk about the barbell system. The barbell economy will have the cognitive workers, the physical workers. You need to do both. After getting an opportunity to see the humanoids in action, it is really going to be tough to be able to compete with the physical or even the caretaking work. I was walking out of a hotel in Lisbon over the summer, and I was trying to find my directions. I needed to go get something at the mall, and I came outside, and all 3 of the people who were parking cars and doing the valet were like this on their phone. And I thought to myself, would I rather have a human person sitting on their phone who can't help me when I can't speak the language, Portuguese, or would I rather have a humanoid, a 6-foot-tall humanoid standing there, recognizing me, recognizing my language, and being able to direct me quite correctly to where I needed to go. And so, we all need to wake up in terms of what's happening. Factories are certainly making a very early transition into robotics. Tesla is going to be more of a humanoid company, a robotics company. And so the price has been brought down dramatically as well. And so, again, we make a lot of mistakes as caretakers, nursing homes. Not to suggest that humanoids are always going to be perfect, but we have to recognize the economics behind a lot of our systems that are broken, such as healthcare and insurance.
Oh, so many.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just ridiculous. Yeah. So one of the things I've been studying, and I think this is quite consistent with the items in your book, and for those of you just joining us, we're talking about this terrific book called Employment is Dead by Deborah Perry Piscione. And sort of the thesis is that we're right on the cusp of traditional employment arrangements sort of evaporating. And we don't know what's going to come next. So one of the theories that I'm very taken with is, you may be familiar with Carlota Perez's theory of economic transition. She's an economic historian, and her argument is we're at one of those moments in capitalism where we've had the old system that sort of peaked in its ability to continue to deliver productivity. It's also clear now that the energy transition is going to have to happen if the Earth is to remain habitable. And I mean, that's not an uncertainty anymore. That's now clarity. Now we're at the stage now where we have to decide what to do about it. It's funny. I was talking to Jeff Tuff and a couple of his colleagues from Deloitte, and they were saying, when you think about uncertainty, there's stuff. It's on a continuum, right? There's stuff that we absolutely have no idea what's going to happen. Then there's stuff where it's pretty clear there's a direction set and now we have to decide what to do. And then there's stuff that's already sort of up and running and in the works and everybody can see it and name it. He said, the climate transition, that's no longer an uncertain thing. It's here and we need to figure out what we're going to do about it. Anyway, so what Carlota is that that we're right in the transition point, right in that turning point between the two systems, and I think she would agree with you that it's going to be much more decentralized. Food's going to be grown much closer to where it's consumed. People are going to be adding value in much smaller groups. We'll commute to cities for entertainment and stuff, but we won't necessarily have to go to an office in a physical city. I mean, that would be her thesis. And it's interesting when you think about, well, what kinds of organizations are going to serve a world that looks like that?
Yeah, and even communal living, right? We're seeing a lot more development, which can be, it sounds like an incredible thing, but that can also be a very dangerous thing if you're moving to communities, to people just like you, let's say politically. You're making that decision. And so, there's all these ramifications that really need to be thought through. We've got significant problems. And while AI is going to increase productivity, I would ask how much more productivity can we absorb? I think many of us in this space feel like we are working harder than ever, faster than ever. I sit in the middle of Silicon Valley more as a thought leader in helping organizations make this transformation to physical AI. But, everyone I talk to is just feeling that 24/7, like we're in our early 20s doing a startup. And so it's going to have its breaking point at some point. But we're really going to have to get creative of what income or revenue or bartering is going to look like in the future, because the day will come, and I think it's going to happen a lot more rapidly than people and communities and government are prepared for.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I talk about strategic inflection points and how they evolve. And it's gradually, and then suddenly, right?
Yeah.
Famously once said. And so you got the Work3 Institute. How does that connect to the book? How does that connect to some of the work that you're doing?
Everybody is trying to figure, and when I say everybody, I mean not only organizations, but institutional investors. I think the entire landscape of investment is going to have a radical shift, because you don't need the capital that you once needed. You can be a company of one and build something significantly out, whether it's to, work towards one of those dozen companies that are kind of going to really command the future. And so, we are looking at ways of how to make the transition initially. Because a lot of companies will look at AI and think of it from a line item budget support, perspective, rather than the strategy behind it. So we are working with various companies and determining, whether you are an AI company, meaning not just traditional AI, but like AI is your business when you're in banking, or you're Domino's Pizza and it's not your business, but you recognize you can bring AI in to handle 80% of the calls for pizza, coming in. And so, simultaneously, you have this native generation coming in, Gen X, Gen Y, who now understands, they don't have to learn the technologies. They've been born and raised in the technologies. So this is something very unique as well with this next generation coming into the workforce. On the one hand, you're seeing a lot of cognitive entry level jobs going away, like at Goldman Sachs and various places. But they can also make a significant amount of money being a content creator or even playing around on the metaverse with Roblox and working for some of the traditional corporates now in the metaverse as well. So, we're really kind of opening up what this future is going to look like in ways that we never anticipated for those of us that just kind of were brought into the cognitive world.
Mhm. Well, and when if you were to say, let's imagine 2030, I'll just pick that randomly. Um, we're through this transition. If you were to work backward and say, well, okay, what does education have to look like, right?
Oh,
What does healthcare have to look like? What
yep.
should we be teaching people? I mean, if we're going to throw people into the gig economy, they need to be prepared, right? And you've also got this interesting phenomena where even if we're top performers, if we're just left to our own devices, we're never going to reach our full potential. I'm thinking here of if you think of star athletes, right? And if you think about what allows a star athlete to be a star athlete, they've got coaches, they've got feedback, they've got all this stuff. And then when I look at leaders in corporations or even entrepreneurs and individuals, there's none of that scaffolding, right? So how do we work backward and create the systems that we need? I mean, but let's just talk about education for a minute. I mean,
I would love to talk about education
yeah,
because, as let's call it the average school being 60,000 a year, but for some of these top schools or out of state tuitions, you're looking at $95,000 a year. And then these young people are graduating and having great difficulty being able, they did everything right, but now can't get a job. And so we are moving into not about the education, not the piece of paper, but the skills that an individual has. I have twin boys who are 20,
oh,
and
wow.
I've seen many, including my own kids, who have dropped out of college, and I completely support it. Because unless you're wanting to be a doctor or something that requires licensure, right? For now, you're going to be much more valuable and ahead of the game if you actually have the skills and utilize content creation in ways that's going to help you get into the door, not in a party atmosphere way, but really trying to start to put out thought leadership at a very early age. But that's university level. Now we're looking at K through 12. What is that preparing you for? So it used to be K through 12 would prepare you to get a college degree or to be able to go to a trade school. So we're definitely seeing an uptick in trade for sure until those humanoids are very accurate and have the dexterity. But I'm telling you, that's coming too. I hear a lot of complaints about the dexterity around the hands and robots. I was in Japan over the summer and was at a company, and the dexterity was just, the robot was just, it looked like a yellow dish towel, so it could do the tiny little components in the semiconductor manufacturing. So it's all coming, and then we just have to wake up and say, is that, call it $300,000-$400,000 college education going to do anything that's going to help me generate revenue or an income in the future?
Well, there is an interesting kind of counterweight that's happening now, and I think this is sort of how systems interact with each other. So back in the day, if you wanted to apply to college, you had to type out an application and copy it at the copy shop and put it in an envelope and send it. And so, there was just only so much bandwidth. So you'd apply to, I don't know, 7, 8 schools. Fast forward, now you've got the Common App. So the kids are applying to, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 schools. And the colleges have responded by doing two things. One is in order to upgrade their rankings, right? They're trying to recruit more students, typically from outside their traditional catchment areas. And ironically, they're trying to recruit more students so they can reject more of them, so they can be seen as more selective, so they get ranked more highly. I mean, it's just horrible. It's just the worst sort of spiteful kind of game. But the second thing it's done for the colleges, on the students' credit, is it's made it really difficult for them to anticipate yields. So the colleges now are really over-indexing on early applicants, and I'm going to, if I get accepted, I'm definitely going to go. So there's that whole dynamic.
Yep.
Now what's happening is the same thing's happening in the job market. So people are applying, again, it used to be you'd apply for, 10 jobs, 12 jobs. Now people are applying literally hundreds of jobs, and the recruiters can't cope. So we went through a little period where people were saying, oh, I recruit the person, not the degree. And in places like Goldman Sachs, right, they would say, oh, we're recruiting for the skills, we're not recruiting for the degree. Guess what? They're back at Columbia, they're back at Harvard, they're back at Booth. Why? Because the signal of quality has gotten so muddy that, at least if you go to a college to recruit, you got some assurance that the people that are there are going to be the kind of people that would work in your organization. So I think there's these systems that are just bumping up against each other in a kind of a not very productive way.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is a lot of AI can take over those roles and do it far better, right? I mean, that's one of the things we looked at JP Morgan and loan approvals. And, for a while, Jamie Dimon had AI work against individuals, just so people wouldn't be fearful of losing their job, but eventually showed how AI could not only make their jobs easier, but make them more effective around loan approval. But the reality is, Rita, we know that AI can really replace that person for doing loan approvals or making an analysis on a company. You're going to have that human in the loop for a little while, but it's hard to compete with the complexity of everything an LLM can teach itself in terms of being more effective at business, and certainly being more effective at P&L. I mean, you look at every time major layoffs happen, right? What happens to Amazon or any of these announcements at Meta? Their stock goes up. Right. So it's just the efficiency, the 500 to 1 ratio, which is really what it is, that AI is going to save you, 500 people to 1. Is really benefiting those companies that do that adoption.
Interesting. So, so how do let's go back to K through 12 education for a minute, because I think there's some interesting new models that are starting to emerge, and I'd love to hear what you think about them. So, our traditional K through 12 system is, it was designed to get kids out of farms and into factories. So it was designed to teach you to show up on time, understand simple concepts, build, some useful skills. You were clumped with people of your own age. You were in a, sort of marching along, in a rote sort of fashion. And for the middle of the pack, it worked pretty well, Now, if you were way below performance or way above performance, it didn't work at all. And so there's a couple of examples of schools that are starting to do things very differently. So there's a school, I think it's in Texas, called Alpha School. And what they do is they take all of their regular curriculum and they put it into a 2-hour block in the morning. And they call it 2-hour learning. And this is augmented by AI. So if you're a third grader, let's say, but you're reading at a 6th grade level, it'll feed you material that's appropriate to your capability. Let's say you're at a third grader, but your math is at a 1st grade level, it'll help you patiently kind of learn how to do that. And so Mackenzie Phillips, who's the founder of this thing, says we can handle all the traditional subjects in that 2-hour block. And that gives us the rest of the day to practice what she calls life skills. And so there aren't teachers, they're what they call guides. And the guides do things like, let's cook for each other. Let's learn how we might run a restaurant, by doing it for each other. Let's go out into the community and learn how emergency services are delivered. Let's do whatever. And then as the kids progress up in age, they take on more ambitious projects. And then their culminating project has to be kind of a big, bold thing that they want to accomplish. And one of the ones that really struck me was there was one of her students who was a mountain biking fanatic. And there was no place to mountain bike where he was. And so his project was to create a mountain biking park where people could come. And as he describes the journey, it was just like originally they thought it would just be really simple. They'll apply to the parks commissioner and they'll say, okay, we'll put in a mountain biking trail. And it turned out to be a whole journey of going all the way through to actually buying private land, raising the money to do that by scouring LinkedIn for anybody who'd ever in life mentioned mountain biking and say, hey, could you send us $10? They raised close to $300,000. And today there is
amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
17
Yeah. No, the answer to that is yes. That's exactly what we have to be transitioning to. I had one son attend a private school here in Menlo Park, and the last semester of his senior year, there was no more academic curriculum. It was life skills. So you could learn how to work on cars, fixing things, whatever course or track on top of a project that you did. My 17-year-old daughter is at public school, and this semester is kind of a waste of time, so we do need to think much more creatively and giving them exposure to all sorts of roles and opportunities. It can be farming, it can be cooking, it can be, land planning, whatever it is that give them better exposure to where the needs are going to be in the future.
So how do you see the economics of all this playing out? So big companies don't need people. Humanoids are going to take over a lot of the physical tasks. Kind of where does that leave us?
That's a great question. Because again, and I think many of us probably experienced this during COVID, you get a check that comes in from the government, but you feel kind of meaningless. I mean, I don't want UBI. I don't think it makes people feel like they have a purpose. So the bigger question, I'm less concerned about the actual money and more concerned about the impact of feeling like you don't have purpose. You can look at all the research of lottery winners, people who've come into money, and the depression rates go up significantly. There are places in the Middle East like Qatar, I forget what their system is called, but you're paid off not just the oil revenues, but they've got all sorts of natural resources and you get subsidized. So most of their labor, as we know, is brought in from other countries and they don't have to work. I mean, how many times can you sit around trying to figure out on a day-to-day? I think that was some of the kind of depression a lot of people felt during COVID, was just every day was the same. And what am I going to do today? And how do I at least keep myself occupied until 2 p.m.? Mm-hmm. So, governments are going to have to figure out how they generate revenue, new sources of revenue, whether it's through tariffs or natural resources or rare earth. I spent 18 years in DC, so I know how these things work. But we are going to need to support the future of people that will not be employed as the rates as we've known it over the last 50 to 70 years.
Super interesting. So there's a whole body of work, and my former professor at Wharton, Peter Capelli, wrote a terrific book with a co-author called In Praise of the Office. And he makes the argument that we don't understand how work actually gets done. And so he uses this illustration. So let's say you're all in the office and you have a problem with a reimbursement check or something, and you go to accounting and you talk to Tony, and Tony rolls his eyes and says, yeah, I've seen this 3 times already this week. Leave it with me. I'll take care of it. Boom, done. Versus I got to email Tony. Tony gets defensive, and this thing could take weeks, right? And so his argument is that a lot of human work gets done in these sort of relationship-intensive micro moments that happen. So that's one chunk of things. Another conversation I've been having is with a guy called Matt Bean, who wrote a terrific book called The Skill Code. And his argument in that book is that we don't really understand, so we have not explicitly come to grips with how apprentices develop skills. That, throughout all of human history, skill development has been older people that knew what they were doing, teaching younger people those skills that they needed to learn. And he uses an interesting example, which is of prostate surgery. And he said, well, so in the past, you'd have the resident who would do some of the simpler things. They'd maybe do the initial incision, they'd do some of the things. And then during the actual surgery, the resident and the attending surgeon would both be sort of inside the patient's body learning, and the resident would actually be part of that, and that skill would be sort of passed along. So introduce robotic surgery. So infinitely better for the patient, right? Tiny incisions, much more precise, much better outcomes, much quicker recovery time. I mean, every single dimension that you can think of with the patient is better. So on that dimension, that's really good news. But the resident, instead of actually being in the patient's body with the attending physician, he or she is watching what's going on a screen. And so when it comes time for them to actually try to perform this skill, they can't do it. So I guess my question for you is, are we just at this transition stage where they won't need to perform the skill anymore, and that's all just going to go away, so we don't need to worry about it? Or do we have to come up with some way of creating these skilled people by some sort of training or apprenticeship model?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, Intuitive Surgical is down the street. And so they've had, the robotic surgery for quite some time, starting with one procedure. And I'm not sure how many procedures they're up to now. I guess the question is, the robot is going to be more precise, right? It's safer for the patient. What happens if, the robot goes crazy or it's overtaken by some rogue force? So yeah, I think we need a backup plan to still have people have various skill sets, but this is evolution, right? We are evolving. And I think the other really interesting thing, and I'm sorry to drag you down this rabbit hole, but that's where my thinking is this day, is how are our brains going to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're not thinking, and kids are growing up with social media or gaming, I worry about the next generation even being able to communicate in a human way. So there are so many psychological, emotional, physical factors that don't really get a part of the dialogue when we just talk about AI adoption overall. And so, we are looking and kind of, what is the world going to look like when we hit 2050, which is really not that far off. We keep saying it was a 25-year project, the Work3 Institute, but we're at 2026 already. So, the countdown is on. And, I think people are going to be surprised how much humanoid adoption, when you've got the Unitree out there, that's $5,900 for the cost of the 6-foot robot or the 4-foot robot. We don't know the electrical costs and that sort of thing. But when that entity, that humanoid, can do the dishes, walk the dog, provide security in the house, clean the house. Anybody who went to CES this year saw the humanoids vacuuming, walking dogs. I mean, it really is remarkable how fast this is all happening.
It's interesting because we had the Jetsons in 1962,
Yes.
and it was Rosie the robot. Remember Rosie?
Yes, I do. I love every Sunday. I was there watching the Jetsons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that future is kind of coming towards us.
Yes.
But I do think there is this sense, and it's reflected in a lot of different literature. So there's a book called Bowling Alone. There's all this work that's being done on people feeling isolated, people not feeling a sense of community, people not feeling connected. Well, if there's some way of earning a living, so let's just set that aside. But if there's some way of doing that, right, does that possibly free up time for genuine human flourishing, right?
It does. But, Rita, I don't know if you're a ChatGPT. I'm a Claude user. And I have to admit, sometimes I talk to the computer. I talk to Claude because I feel like Claude knows me.
Oh yeah,
better. It's read my books. It's read all my work.
I get it, Rita, and
yeah,
and I use it.
Yes, but I will literally talk to the computer going, okay, come on, are you kidding? You can come up with something better than that. And so we are blending over to the physical and the digital, having those digital relationships. That's another thing I'm looking at. You've got this next generation that doesn't necessarily want to get married or have kids. And so, I have yet to believe people are truly marrying a humanoid or an android. I hear about it happening in Asia. We certainly
Really?
know about, oh yeah,
People
about the
marrying these things?
device. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I believe it was Japan. It could have been China. Um, and so, we are very concerned when kids are getting on AI programs and asking for suicide advice and things like that. So it's, there's an entirely new dynamic um, that will factor in, in ways that I don't even think we can really truly comprehend how it's going to manifest itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Really interesting.
Yeah.
So, if I draw some historical analogies, and I only learned about this recently, is apparently when writing first became accessible to ordinary people, Plato himself was apparently incredibly concerned that this was going to damage the brains of people, because once you had a written document, right, you no longer had to recall all the facts and the details and the things. And there is some evidence that it actually had that effect, that people could no longer tell, these long historical sagas flawlessly. They couldn't recall all the facts anymore. They couldn't do this because it was written down, so they didn't need to, right? And that shaped the way that their brain was. And then at the same time, imagine a person who is literate entering a civilization that's illiterate, and that would have been like magic. You mean this person could know something
Yeah.
without another person telling them, and this person could learn something without it having to be developed, and like, wow, right? And so I just think we're at that kind of moment, right?
Oh, for
Yeah, well,
sure. For sure. And history does repeat itself, right? It's just when I was first told about, I looked at the person at this Copenhagen dinner, his name's Lars, and
uh-huh.
I said, oh, you're crazy. And a couple days later, I was in London at the Natural History Museum, walking around the dinosaur exhibit and saw the word extinct. And I thought, wow, the same asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs is still floating around, right? But what was so interesting to me, I'd never really thought about how long had dinosaurs been around versus humans, or humans versus dinosaurs. And went home or went to the hotel that night, asked Claude, and realized that humans, if you look at a calendar year, are really just the last few minutes of December 31st. And so, I do think we will find some repetitive element of history repeating itself as we continue to evolve.
Mhm. Mhm. So are you optimistic, pessimistic? What, where would you put yourself on the continue? So just for those joining us just now, I'm talking with the author of this terrific book called Employment is Dead: How Disruptive Technologies Are Revolutionizing the Way We Work. And basically the chatbots and the humanoids are coming for us all.
Yeah, I would say, for the work that I do, this is the most interesting work I've ever done. So I find it incredibly exciting for the next generation when I have 3 children that are going to have to figure out meaning and don't have to go to college anymore, or can go for a year and drop out and be completely off the payroll, doing quite well financially, at least for the time being. I'm a bit pessimistic about where we as humans, what our place is going to be in the future. Because if AI and humanoids do everything better, what are we for? What are humans for at
Mhm.
that point? And so, yeah, I mean, I do think we can be better. We've all seen Little House of the Prairie snippets over the last couple days. And, you are reminded that there was a time when cognitive work didn't exist, and we had to work the farm, we had to work the homes, we had to have better communication and interaction between humans. And so in the short term, we're going to get time back. We've wanted this European lifestyle for so long. And so us Americans are going to be able to enjoy less work, except for the people in the AI space. But, so that'll be the interim benefit for sure.
Interesting. Well, there is an argument that I hear, which says, there's things that are uniquely human. There's the arts, there's the creative pursuits, there's the creation of new concepts and ideas that is uniquely human, and that what AI can do is only plow the ground that's already understood. And it's not coming up with novelty. Is one thing that I hear, and then the other thing I hear a lot is, well, wait a minute, if we made the human-facing layer of these systems of care, so education, healthcare, development, social care, criminal justice, if we were able to make the human-facing layer less expensive, then you could actually put more humans into the system and do a better job of care and those kinds of things. And so I do hear that argument, which is we actually need more people, not less.
Well, I have to respectfully disagree with those individuals. Play around with Nano Banana, which is Google's program. I think that's the real frustration, is the creativity, just by being able to describe something that you'd like to see. And look, we place value. I remember walking around an art museum, and I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to art. I can appreciate the beauty of something, and I would look at something and say it's a Picasso, and it just looks like my 3-year-old at the time could have done a better drawing. Why is that art? It's art because somebody says it is. It's beauty, and it's expensive because somebody says it is. So it's really all in the eyes of the beholder of what the value is. I know there's deep concerns in Hollywood right now, and people are like, oh, they'll never accept an AI actor. But if you can't tell that it's an AI actor, and you don't need Tilly to show up at events where she's always busy or something, you're just not going to know the difference. And I think, like I said, minute by minute, these AI systems get better, stronger, faster, and more effective.
Oh yeah, I've argued about the Tilly Norwood moment for a good chunk of time now, and I've said, they should have been able to see this coming. I mean, this is not like it came out of the blue. I mean, we had Toy Story in 1995.
Exactly.
And we've had AI actresses, and we've had AI. AI right now is definitely being widely deployed in the sort of what do they call it? The standbys. What we need 300 people in a crowd scene. Well, those don't have to be actual people, right? I mean, if they're just a backdrop of a Bollywood movie or something, they don't have to be real people. So I think that's definitely something that has been coming very clearly for a long time. The other thing I think is interesting is how incumbents don't want to see it, right? So
a
guy I'm thinking of right now is I think he's the CEO of De Beers. And he's telling the world, he's saying to the world, artificial diamonds, you should not buy them. They're not good. Da, 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 da. And I'm thinking to myself, what planet do you live on? Chemically, it's indistinguishable from, rock, a mined diamond. And it has all these benefits that come with it. It can be cheaper. It doesn't require child labor. It's not destroying the earth. I said, why do you think just because you prefer it that way that people are not going to go buy these things? So I think there's a huge kind of corporate reluctance.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, it's taken away their control, not to mention their wealth. And I think we're also at an inflection point of who do we want to be as humans, whether you care about the climate or, fast fashion destroying, you try to get young people to think about the repercussions of fast fashion and where it goes when you no longer care about that. But anybody who saw Blood Diamonds or Blood Money, I don't think we want that. We don't want to support that world anymore. The abuses behind it, unfortunately, were just, not disclosed. And until somebody came to the table to create a movie or a documentary, we didn't really understand the actions of our, or just the reactions to our actions overall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So this has been just fascinating. I mean, it's such an interesting, provocative topic. And I think your message is really, this is happening faster than most people realize.
Yeah.
Which is something to think about. So what should CEOs do? What should people working in these systems be doing right now?
So there's two levels here. One, again, as I mentioned, this is not a line item expense. This is a strategy. AI is a strategy. And what do you need to do to bring your people along, at least for now, on that train? How do you get them to see the value in understanding? Absolutely, organizations are going to need that chief AI officer, and that HR leader is also going to play a very, very interesting component. I think those will be two of the most important positions moving forward. It could be, right now, AI can take over the entire org chart, including the board of directors. There's an opportunity to really rethink corporate structures. But in the interim, you need to bring in a chief AI officer, and you need to make your CHRO, your chief human resource officer, a really critical part because it is going to be about elimination more than likely than addition on HR. And it's very critical to figure out what parts of the organization or people within a division that will start to be let go. And that's why it's such a critical function. Mm-hmm. But it's really figuring out, what type of company you are and the AI strategy that you need to employ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talk a lot about centering a company. Like what is the thing that's sort of, what are the legitimate opportunities and what are the things that you're just not going to entertain? And that's a really strategic
for sure
that a lot of companies don't make. So where do people go to learn more? How do we find out about Work3? What do we do if we want to sort of dive in a little deeper, aside from buying this terrific book?
Buying the book is great. I think there's going to be, I know I have been tasked with leading up some research in this space, again, I'm looking at the great displacement now, and, what that impact's going to be for individuals, for organizations, and governments across the board. And so, there's lots of opportunities to learn about AI. That's the thing. Stanford has now released its, same in-person AI courses online for free. So there's lots of opportunities to learn about AI. But I personally recommend to people, who are fearful of learning AI technologies, just spend an hour on a Saturday morning, wake up extra early, play around with some technology and realize how much of a time saver this can be for you.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. That's just wonderful. Well, Deborah, it has been a pleasure. I'm so pleased and grateful you took the time. We will be talking more, I suspect, and I'll keep an eye on every chapter in the book to see which of these predictions are coming more true and and what we need to be doing in response as strategists and leaders. So thank you so much.
Oh, such a pleasure, Rita. It's great to see you again.